Well, welcome everyone to another version of Topcon Talks Construction. My name is Murray Lodge, and I'm the Senior Vice President and General Manager for the Construction Business Unit at Topcon. And today we have two fantastic guests with us. We've got Kate Fox-Wood, who is the Senior Director of Government Relations with AEM. And we have Dariana Tani, who is Economist for the Americas for GlobalData. So these two are very knowledgeable and on the topics we're going to cover today. I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves to you. So Kate, could you go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Murray. It's good to be with everyone today. Thanks to Topcon for putting this series on and inviting me to speak. I am Kate Wood. I am Senior Director of Government Relations for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. I try to make sure I spell out acronyms because we run around in Washington, D.C. There's so many of them. But so AEM represents about 1,000 off-highway equipment manufacturers in the construction, agriculture, forestry, utility, and mining sectors. And I work in the Washington, D.C. office for AEM, overseeing our federal advocacy efforts, ensuring that we are advocating for equipment manufacturers' policy priorities that include things like infrastructure, which I have a feeling we will get into quite a bit today. We advocate for rural America policy, so policies that are going to keep rural America strong, such as agriculture policy, rural broadband policy. We also advocate for trade policy, as well as tax. And then last but certainly not least, which I believe we may talk about a bit today as well, workforce development policy. So suffice it to say that we are very busy here in DC, and I'm just happy to be here to share some updates on everything that's going on.
Thank you, Kate. Next, we have Dariana.
Thanks, Murray, and Topcon for organizing this podcast and inviting GlobalData to participate in this. An economist at the GlobalData Construction, and I'm responsible for the Americas construction coverage and forecasts, and with a focus on the US, Canada, the main economies in Latin America, including Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Colombia. GlobalData Construction, we produce forecast data and analysis over 91 countries, and also provide access to 150,000 construction projects for every sector and of construction, and also over 200 countries. GlobalData cover a range of industry from technology to healthcare to retail, consumer, and mining and construction. Fantastic.
Well, as I said, you can see both our panelists today are well informed on the topics that we're going to cover. I think, today, just as we go through this, we're going to talk about just the economy in US and in North America, and then kind of move into maybe with the new legislation and the new administration that's in, kind of things that will impact the construction industry. And then just really get maybe into some more details on the construction industry as a whole and the impact or the impacts that we're having today. So to start with, if we look at 2020, it was a challenging year for many industries, but the construction industry as a whole fared pretty well, even given the whole COVID situation. And so I just would like to know from both of you for 2021, what do you see as the outlook for the upcoming year?
So we expect that momentum in the US construction industry would be sustained this year. We expect growth of 1.4%, and we risk on the upside if President Biden manages to pass his infrastructure bill. Also, although growth is expected to slow slightly in the first half of this year due to the efforts of the pandemic and the restrictions and the COVID-19 restrictions, we expect that vaccine efforts and Biden coronavirus relief package worth $1.9 trillion, which is expected to be passed by mid-March, on top of the $900 billion in relief that was passed last December by the Trump administration, would give a boost to the industry this year. However, we expect that hard-hit sectors such as leisure and hospitality, and to a lesser extent, retail, airports, and offices, will continue to struggle this year. Although government efforts to vaccinate most of the US population by the end of the summer could allow these sectors to recover faster in the second half of this year. But we believe that the ongoing shift to online shopping, which has accelerated during the pandemic, is creating less demand for retail buildings and more demand for warehouse properties. Also, the shift to remote working could also affect the demand for new offices buildings in the near term. Although we believe that this will be less of an issue as the pandemic resides. In the medium to long term, we expect that long-standing issues such as lack of skilled labor, expensive land, and rising construction material costs will continue to hold back investment in the industry in the coming years. Although we expect Biden's more friendly policies towards immigration, as well as his his long-term infrastructure plan to increase investment in transport, clean energy, housing, schools, broadband, healthcare, and high-tech manufacturing. If this infrastructure bill is passed through Congress, it will create more opportunities for the growth in the industry in the years ahead.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of unknowns as we look at what's going to happen in the upcoming year. Kate, there's parts of the economy that are doing well, those that aren't. When we look at from a civil side, because we look at it from a Topcon perspective, and some of our listeners, what they're really, that's the segment of the market that's important to them. What regions do you see, and what segments of the civil construction side will be doing well this year?
Well, Dariana nailed it, and just outlining very well kind of all the different kind of variables that are at play here. And I kept hearing one theme was Biden. There's like such an emphasis being placed on what the president's policies are going to kind of, like promote and push through. And then Murray, to your point, it's all very unknown. Like there's a lot of ideas being tossed around. There's like wild price tags being tossed around. And then you get on to the Hill, to Capitol Hill, where there's the other lever of action that kind of is dependent on all this as well. Congress is going to take all of these recommendations. So we'll get into that in a little bit, because there's a lot of fun to talk about with what's going on Capitol Hill with this. But to your question, Murray, about regions and market segments, I think to Dariana's point, I think from AEM's perspective, we predict that we'll see a lot of activity in the infrastructure arena. It's just continues to be not just this past couple of months, but even during the 2016 presidential election. I mean, we've been at this for about 4 or 5 years. Every week is infrastructure week, right? So I definitely think there is going to be a lot of growth and opportunity there in the infrastructure sector. I think you're going to see a ton in it when it comes to telecommunications as well. Specifically, when you talk about infrastructure, it's a really big definition for a lot. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, right?
It does.
So beyond the traditional assets like your roads, highways, and bridges, I think the telecommunications industry is going to see a lot of boost here, because there is so much conversation about broadband access, because you've got families and workers, businesses trying to operate at full tilt, leveraging, systems that were already maxed to begin with. And members of Congress definitely hearing that from their constituents. And it's all I hear about when we talk to members of Congress, is the need to expand rural broadband, increase capacity. So to that end, if you look at the COVID relief package that's working its way through Congress now that Dariana mentioned, or you look at some of the things that people are talking about in a bigger infrastructure package that may come next, there's a lot of money being put on the table potentially for broadband, both in urban and suburban communities, but particularly in rural communities, which has implications not only for the equipment functionality, right, but also for the industry, the utility sector. So those are kind of my predictions. I don't necessarily have any thoughts on the regions. I think everyone's going to see benefit. I don't know that there will be a section of the United States where one will benefit over the other. I will mention, to try to answer that question, because I hate being the politician who just dodges questions, but I'm pretty good.
Well, I think you've answered it very well. I don't think
pretty good, but I will say though, there is conversation that was really picked up steam this week about earmarks coming back to Congress. So these are member directed spending projects. Is the nicer way of saying earmarks. And they were phased out and banned a couple of years ago, so they haven't really been a tool that members of Congress can use to show constituents that they're delivering. But if we're to see a return of earmarks, that's going to be a really interesting kind of indication of where money in terms of the regional aspect is going to be spent. So what members are going to have their projects prioritized, how quickly they're going to be able to get that money spent, because that's one of the other big issues about earmarks, is that they oftentimes get allocated and appropriated and the money just sits there. I was reading an article recently in the Washington Post that was reporting on some earmarks that have been sitting unspent for the past 10 years. And then I'll end this by saying that the earmark conversation is certainly not done. There's still a lot of skepticism on Capitol Hill about whether that's actually going to happen, whether that's actually a good idea. But very interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you covered a lot there. If money hasn't been spent in 10 years, that project probably wasn't very important to start with, was it? Yeah. Who knows?
Depends on who you talk to, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, yeah. So, that broadband, obviously with people working from home, more and more of it, that certainly I'm sure is a hot topic. But you brought up the legislation side of the whole thing. And I think there's a lot of things that are happening. Your comment there on infrastructure, you're right. We've been hearing about that. And that's been in the previous administration. That was a key, thing they wanted to get passed. And it just seems, if you look at infrastructure, and especially for the transportation, has been a struggle for years to get a constant funding going into that. So with this push for the infrastructure, what do you see happening with the upcoming or potential upcoming bill? Is that going to get through finally? Is there enough people on both sides that'll agree to that? Who wants to take that one?
I think with regards to the timing of the bill, I think it is unclear how long it would take the Biden administration to pass it through Congress, but it is likely that the administration would set deadline for September this year, which is when the extension of the Fixing America Surface Transportation Act expires. Passing the infrastructure bill will depend on bipartisan support, but this will require the president to work with Republicans, lawmakers, to find common grounds. One of the things that we expect to see that both parties find agreed on is 5G, as Kate mentioned, technology. Broadband technology to expand in rural communities, and also to electric cars investment. So we're going to, I think those are the things that the Republicans, lawmakers, and the Democrats agree on. But I think there is little doubt that Biden would look to pass his infrastructure bill by using the budget reconciliation procedure and which would require like a simple majority in the Senate. But I think, since the Republicans didn't like use it in the current fiscal year, I think the Biden would have a second chance to pass it through, to use it again.
Yeah, I agree. Kate, you're back in Washington and you're interacting with, all the different, groups that are out there, and both. Don't you really see both sides? I mean, I look at it when you talk to people that are out there. There's not anybody that doesn't think the infrastructure needs work, needs improvement. And is it really that hard to get bipartisan, on something that's affecting everybody? Do you see it really being a challenge, or you think this is finally something that could actually move forward for the new infrastructure bill?
Well, Murray, I'm always an optimist when it comes to infrastructure. I kind of have to be, since I've been at least AEM's chief infrastructure cheerleader for a few years now, so to speak. And it's a role I'm very passionate about. So yes, I do think that there is at this point in time, a collective kind of push. There is momentum to passing something on a bipartisan basis. To Dariana's point, the conversation about how the bill will be passed, whether they're going to pursue the reconciliation, tool, would not make that bipartisan. And so at this point, though, we are hearing from the four corners of the committee. So the two individuals on transportation and infrastructure on the House side, as well as the two leadership members in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. They're giving at least industry groups every indication that they're going to start working on this in a bipartisan fashion. There's quite a bit of competition between the two chambers going on right now, because you have Chairman DeFazio, who is such an institutional, his institutional knowledge on this issue is amazing. And he passed his highway bill or surface transportation reauthorization bill out last year. And so he essentially has a bill already. So they're going to get to work on that, very soon. And I'm hearing that they're going to have a markup in early May with his committee. So, and that's kind of in response to a bit of gauntlet throwing that Chairman Carper on the Senate side has said about his bill. He is kind of starting more from scratch, although the Senate committee passed a version of the surface transportation bill in 2019, which seems like eons ago, but that was under a different Chairman Barrasso. So he's kind of has an opportunity to put his own mark on this. So it's going to take them a little bit more time, but we are also hearing that they are targeting kind of a mid-May timeframe. So we could really start to see things. And again, this is very optimistic. And again, on the condition that they pursue a bipartisan approach, that there's not an appeal to reconciliation there. We may see something by Memorial Day. I always get that question about timeline, right? But Dariana's point is at the very minimum, the surface transportation program will expire in September. They were unable to pass a long-term reauthorization last year. They kicked the can down the road. And so they have to do something, at least on the surface piece. As Dariana mentioned, President Biden is, envisioning something much broader, though, than just roads, highways, and bridges. There's a lot more entailed with that $1.9 trillion price tag. So how it's all going to come together is still very much being discussed. And how the different committees that have different jurisdictions over all these entities, it's not just in one committee in the Senate and one committee in the House. If you start talking about broadband, that expands the scope of it. If you start talking about public transit, that expands the scope of it. It's a fascinating puzzle, but I do think that their momentum is there. The president is hosting lawmakers, at the White House. bipartisan delegations of lawmakers to talk about infrastructure on a regular basis. He's engaging his Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg. You're seeing a level of stakeholders coming together that we haven't seen consistently in it when it comes to infrastructure. So, so today I'm optimistic about it. I don't know, Dariana, I don't know what your thoughts are, if I'm being too Pollyanna, so to speak.
No, that's good. Oh, please, Dariana.
Well, I think it will take, I mean, regarding the timing of the infrastructure bill, I think it will take a bit of, like I said, bipartisan support. And I think the Biden administration, there's no doubt that they will try to use again the budget reconciliation procedure to pass it through Congress. And I think the deadline for it, I think they will set the deadline for September this year because of the extension of this bill, of this Surface Transportation Act bill will expire at the end of September. So, but I think one of the things that, as I mentioned before, that both Republicans and Democrats agree on are the 5G, investment in 5G technology, and investment also in electric cars and charging infrastructure at the national level.
Great. Well, yeah, hopefully we do get some compromising and make some headway on that, because the infrastructure bill would be very important to our listeners here today. So as we move on, we look outside of the legislature and we kind of maybe hone in on the construction industry as a whole. One of the topics that Topcon has been bringing up for years is the lack of, development, increase in productivity in the construction industry as a whole. You look at all the other manufacturing industries, they have really adopted technology and continue to grow and expand. Construction is one of the largest industries in the world. And yet, if you look at it over the last, 30, 40 years, productivity has not gone up at all. And it's, people have been doing it the old school way and it's falling behind. Is it going to continue that way? Or are there things happening that realize that we need to do things differently to be more, catch up with the other industries that have already adopted technology?
Yeah, sure. I think under the Biden administration, efforts to raise investment in technologies that capture and reduce carbon emissions can be expected to accelerate in the next years. We can expect to see the government to push forward its policy to accelerate investment in new technologies such as electric cars and charging infrastructure, as well as investment in smart electric grids and renewable energy resources, as well as efforts to electrify the building sector and increase energy efficiency in a range of ways. So we can also expect to see efforts to accelerate investment around the next generation of building materials and key technologies like battery and energy storage that can cut prices of electric cars and increase their variety. This will not only create millions of new jobs, but also boost the country's manufacturing and technology sectors. In terms of electric cars, the president has plans to restore a tax credit to encourage more families to buy electric cars. He also has plans to work with Congress, the state and local governments, and the private sector to adopt these technologies and also invest in the construction of a national electric charging system to power them. We also going to see efforts to install advanced metering systems to modernize the country's electric grids which is going to help, to support other regional electric markets. We can also expect to see actions to accelerate the development of low carbon aviation and shipping technology, and the construction of more highways, of the construction of high-speed railway networks. While many states and local governments in the US have already stepped up efforts to adopt many of these technologies, the Biden administration has plans to create more incentives to accelerate their adoption.
Okay. So yeah, if you look at that carbon footprint, trying to lower that. And so from a construction standpoint, you've got most of your equipment today, it runs off of diesel. And to lower the carbon footprint, you've either got to convert those to electric, or those machines have to run more efficiently. And that kind of plays into what Topcon as a company, if we can double the speed or double the productivity of a machine, obviously then the less carbon is being put into the field. So that's where, when I talked about technology, is going beyond just the traditional ways. In some governments, because it's a problem all over. And in some countries, the government has actually provided stimulus to get the contractors themselves to adopt technology, where they realize without incentive or helping the contractors, they're going to continue to do it the same way. Kate, do you see any chance of that happening in the US or, in North America, where some of this stimulus would be to try and get this old school thinking more modern?
I would never say to my state DOT friends that they're old school. I would probably get a lot of raised eyebrows on that one. But Murray, you're right and we talked about this before about what other nations are doing in this arena. There are several different recent iterations of legislation that I referenced in the Senate and the House as it relates to the surface transportation reauthorization that tackles the concept of incentivizing technology adoption. So relevant to today's discussion, as you were just talking about, Murray, there was language included in those two bills that would direct the Secretary of Transportation to develop a program under the Technology and Innovation Deployment Program. That's a mouthful. But essentially to promote the application of advanced digital construction management systems. So that may not be as strong as a mandate as you see in other nations like in the UK or in Japan, but this would, in a gentle way, seek to accelerate state DOT's adoption by doing things such as encouraging them to weigh the cost of digitalization and technology when setting their project budgets, encouraging, the workforce development kind of piece of this, trying to figure out how we're going to, train the next generation of construction workers to understand this technology. And so having that language inserted in such an important piece of infrastructure legislation does indicate that there is an understanding, in the halls of Congress, at least, that digital construction technology has an important role to play in the future. And to Dariana's point about just the emphasis that's being placed on green energy, green infrastructure, electric vehicle charging. I mean, this is an opportunity for the equipment manufacturing industry to make the case about how this technology does things like minimizes rework, improves idle time, all these things that will, help reduce emissions and kind of help the administration and help Secretary Buttigieg's goal of reducing administration within the transportation sector. We just recently had a conversation with some folks over at USDOT. So these are folks who just got in, a couple of weeks ago, and they have long careers in transportation, whether at the municipal level or at the state level or at the federal level. But it was a really awesome opportunity to present to them what the equipment manufacturing industry is doing to reduce emissions. So get the opportunity to talk about the electrification trends that the industry is seeing, whether that's a hybrid, or just, full-fledged electrification. And I think we got a lot of surprises from that meeting in terms of just, they didn't know that that's what the industry was doing. We talked about the technology piece and how important it was for that goal, that, emissions reductions goal with them. And the other points that we wanted to make clear, and we're going to continue to emphasize this within the administration and on Congress as it relates to kind of the environmental benefits, as well as the emissions goal that they have, is that at least for equipment manufacturers, off-highway equipment, it's not the same as automobiles. So the kind of emissions standards and things and policies that you're placing on personal vehicle use is not, it is very different. While the industry is making advancements on things like electrification, these, they're not operating in environments where there's charging infrastructure at the ready. So we need to address that. There are safety implications to consider when you're thinking about technicians working on some of this equipment. There's a little uncertainty about whether that's actually a safe move for them. So I think it's important to emphasize to the administration that the industry is moving forward and at a very rapid pace, much like was done with the Tier 4 engine emissions, and those steps that were taken, but that we need to be a partner with them in that effort. It should try to avoid any regulatory maneuverings that would, seriously hinder or disadvantage the industry, at this time. So I guess what's the saying? I'd rather be at the table than on the menu. And so that's really what we were emphasizing to regulators at DOT a few weeks ago. And again, it was a really good dialogue, a lot of light bulbs going off, like, oh, I didn't know that I just thought all this heavy equipment was just diesel, diesel, dirty, and it was just a really good. And so we're making inroads and converting some folks to just how advanced the technology is, in the off-highway industry these days.
Yeah, so. That's a great point. I think where we are today, because things are changing so rapidly, is we need to educate. There's so many things that are out there that can change things to the better, but it's a matter of just getting everybody informed so they know what's available and not there. The whole thing that was done with Tier 4, I mean, people don't realize that what comes out of a Tier 4 engine today is, is cleaner than a lot of the time that the air that's coming into it, and trying to take that. So there is things that are happening, and there's a lot more that needs to. So you bring that up, educating and looking at the construction industry where it is. Part of it, the other thing is where the construction industry is suffering is a lack of workforce, or at least if you talk to the contractors today, many of them are saying their number one issue is finding people. And it seems to be that more of this younger generation is looking to get into computers or gaming or something else. And yet we have to have people in construction because we have to be able to do the 5G, to build the roads, to build the buildings. Is Washington and do others see this as a problem? And is there, a way that we can change this trend from what it is today?
Well, I think that is a key issue and long-standing issue in the industry that the industry has faced in the past years, and in particular, the lack of skilled labor, which is causing wage inflation and leading to additional increases in home prices and as well as building costs in general. So, and is discouraging home developers to build more affordable houses. So we think that Biden friendly policies towards immigration could help address some of these issues. The president has already passed a number of executive orders related to immigration, around 11 so far, and including the order to stop the construction works of the border wall with Mexico. And he also introduced an immigration bill in February, known as the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, and to establish a year pathway to provide U.S. citizenship for nearly 11 million undocumented people. So the bill is part of Biden's campaign proposals to overhaul the entire the country's immigration system, and is perhaps the most ambitious immigration bill that any administration has put forward in decades. I think whether the bill, I think, will get passed through Congress. I think that will depend on, again, on bipartisan support. But given the Democrats' a slim majority in the Senate, it would require the Biden administration to gain 10 Senate Republican votes to avoid the full filibuster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so getting more workers in would definitely be, help to it. There's a lot of talk about, increasing the minimum wage. States have done it, and they're maybe looking at it from a federal standpoint. The construction industry actually pays very well. And, there's people that are looking at, different ways to make a livable, salary and a career. And I think, the construction industry is often overlooked for that. And I know AEM has really been, targeting some of that. Kate, can you share any insight as to what you guys have been doing?
I'd be happy to. To build on that point about just the compensation benefits in the construction industry being above average, the equipment manufacturing industry, from soup to nuts pays. I don't want to misquote this, but it pays about 30% over the national average. So the dialogue around the minimum wage conversation is very important for a number of reasons, but the industry already pay, at least the equipment manufacturing industry already pays above that, well above that. So, and we've been making that case in the public awareness efforts. We definitely make that case when we're talking to folks about why they need to get engaged with the industry. We could probably spend all day talking about the public awareness campaign that's being undertaken to kind of recast manufacturing and construction as technologically advanced, as challenging, as engaging, rather than the traditional manufacturing job that has sometimes, and I never thought this, but I could see why some folks did, is that it's a dirty job. It's not, it's so, and we're making inroads there. Legislatively, two things I want to flag for listeners, as well as for you, Murray and Dariana, I'm sure you're aware of, is that there is a renewed interest in the apprenticeship program in terms of modernizing it. The National Apprenticeship Program that is run has not been updated since it was first authorized in the 1930s, I want to say. And you can imagine how just dramatically different the workforce landscape and the skills required, have changed since that time. So there is a bipartisan effort going on right now to reform the apprenticeship program, the registered apprenticeship program. AEM, when it comes to registered apprenticeships, are in support of modernizing the current system. We would like to see more flexibility for employers within that system. We have a number of OEMs that have attempted to, launch and register their apprenticeship programs that deliver incredible results, but have had any number of kind of roadblocks when they go to register. It's a very difficult process. And so we're going to continue to push for, some middle ground where employers have a little bit more flexibility, so that because we see the system, the apprenticeship the apprenticeship platform, that whole philosophy has worked, for a number of nations. It's worked in the U.S., so we want to see it. We want to really see it take off, because we see it would really benefit not just equipment manufacturing, but construction as well. And then the other piece is this focus on what has happened to displaced workers as a result of COVID. And in terms of, Dariana mentioned the difficulty that the hospitality and leisure industry are experiencing. So you have a host of workforce from that industry that are looking for retraining and reskilling opportunities. And that's an awesome opportunity for the equipment manufacturing industry and the construction industry. And so Congress is working at reauthorizing the federal job training program that is up. So it's called the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, again, another acronym, gotta love it. But to that end, if they're able to reauthorize this at a funding level that will actually make a difference, then we're in business, in terms of retraining, reskilling, and it could mean great things for the workforce development efforts for a whole new generation of Americans. Honestly, the thing that we continue to encounter, the roadblock that we continue to encounter, is just the funding level. We are trying to build momentum to increase that funding level to a point where it's actually effective, because to date, when you look at the federal pie, the spending for workforce development, adult retraining and job reskilling has not really been the priority that it needs to be. So unfortunately, COVID has kind of given us an opportunity where we're able to take that on. So just two things to flag: apprenticeships, and then the WIOA reauthorization. So a lot going on in the workforce arena when it comes on the Hill. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Actually, you talk about that, and the displacement, COVID being bad and displacing people from jobs that may be a while in coming back, and being able to retrain them to go into something different. Yeah. And I think if we tied that in with that previous discussion we had with technology, for someone to say, oh, I've never been on a piece of equipment before, or I've never done that, I can't. But being able to come in and utilize technology to all of a sudden be able to get in the seat of a piece of equipment and be able to operate it, or to get out on a job and realize that it's not impossible. It's just about that being trained to do that. So that is very enlightening and encouraging that across all fields that there's ways to employ more people and for these people to make more money. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. And I think we could keep going on here for another, like you said, hours or days on these types of topics that are affecting so many of us. I just want to thank both of you for joining us today. And if you have anything else that you'd like to add here, please do. Dariana, is there anything else that you'd like to add to our conversation?
Sure. I think, I think what you mentioned about rescaling and also what Kate mentioned, that about rescaling and also helping workers in the leisure and hospitality sector to probably enter in the construction industry. I think is great that the government these policies are great, but I think ultimately, I think in the long term we're going to need more than that for to lower costs, building costs in the industry. Because I think as you don't only have the issues with like wage inflation due to the lack of skilled labor, also non-skilled labor is an issue in the industry. And I think that Biden's more friendly immigration policies or friendly immigration policies, I think, could help the sector to address these issues. We also going to see that although he's going to keep tough on China, I think we expect that a less disruptive foreign environment in general would help address also issues with home building, also rising housing costs in general. I think we also have to look into that. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, like, recently lumber prices reach like record highs recently, and I think this is adding to home builders, and is probably could limit home building activity this year. We also have seen mortgage rates rising in recent weeks, and as the economy continues to recover, we're going to see efforts from the Federal Reserve, the Fed, to be less inclined to buy mortgage-backed securities to maintain these mortgage rates at these record lows. So I think we have to kind of bear these kind of issues in mind. And but I think it's quite good to see that the U.S. government is been putting all these policies and measures in place. And hopefully, I think by the end of this year, we get a infrastructure bill passed. Yep. And that definitely going to boost not only the construction sector, but also the technology and the manufacturing sectors.
Yeah, I think that housing supply and demand has certainly been skewed with the COVID. People now wanting to, a lot of them move rural and get out of the city. Yeah. Housing market really across the entire country has been very strong. And as you said, with, record low rates, all those things have played together to make a strong market, and appears to be it's going to continue for much longer. Kate, anything else you'd like to add to our conversation today?
I just want to say that I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Dariana, it's been a pleasure. Murray, a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope all of our hopes and dreams come true when it comes to infrastructure.
And that's that optimistic attitude you have, Kate, and we love that. And that's what keeps everybody happy. Okay, well, thank both of you for joining us. I would like to thank all of our listeners for participating, and hopefully this has been an enjoyable conversation for you today. And we look forward to you participating in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.